Okay, good morning, everyone. We are going to cover a topic which may put my job in jeopardy. Remember, in a specific community, not to be named, a rabbi told me that a certain other rabbi tried to get rid of Kiddush Club in his shul, and eventually he was fired. So this rabbi told me, it's Kiddush Club 1, rabbis nothing. So I don't know if today we'll even up the score, I don't know. But either way, we always try to tackle some difficult topics at different angles of it, and also just to appreciate the complexity of the issues, to see it from a halachic standpoint, from a social standpoint. I'm going to focus mostly today on the halachic standpoint, but I'll leave it to you to make the judgment call on these different issues. But I just thought it would be interesting to discuss, especially in shuls that Kiddush clubs are widespread. It should be noted that about 20 years ago there was a major push in a lot of shuls to stop any administering of alcoholic beverages in their shuls. I know Rabbi Mordechai Willig's shul is a dry shul in Riverdale. I know there's a number of other shuls that are dry. Now the obvious response is, 1 second, so then everyone's going other places to get the alcohol. Okay, but you could. Some of this is a question of policy, is a question of what's the word? How we the optics, right? Some of it is the optics, but then you also have to deal with the issue of alcoholism in the community. So there's a lot of issues I'm not really going to be able to completely deal with fully, but I'll touch on them briefly, at least partially. So I have in your source sheet an article that was written in 2005 by Steve Lippman. It's called Whiskey Rebellion. And in this article, he quotes from a recent convention. Nefesh International was not so recent anymore, but it was mentioned there that many therapists showed, based on their research, and I think they didn't do like a major study, but I guess they partly surveyed the communities, that invariably youngsters who struggle with alcoholic tendencies trace their introduction to experiences they had in shul or at events such as weddings and bar mitzvahs. Rabbi Abraham Twersky, who's no longer with us in this world, but he was a major figure in JACS and Jewish addiction. I forgot what the CES, but maybe you could look it up and tell me. But substance support, Jewish addictions, community support. I don't remember, but he was a major figure in the addiction world, and he thinks there is a correlation, and kids learn what they see from their parents, and they see that a l'chaim is acceptable. But he said they really should show the community and make a good example. And our very own Rabbi Karapkin, who at that time was the rabbi of Kehilat Yavne in Los Angeles, he said parents sauntering into shul with scotch on their breath are not positive role models. What? That's because they're drinking bourbon?
What about bourbon?
Oh, bourbon. All right. Okay. Sauntering out of shul is also a problem. Recently, there was a panel discussion held in Shomer Shabbos with Rabbi Yaakov Bender in honor of Dr. Gaft. And Rabbi Bender, for like 3 or 4 minutes, I saw the clip, he was talking about Toameha, and there's communities that people are drinking excessively before Shabbos, driving to shul drunk, and unfortunately there was a teenage boy who killed somebody, and he was talking about it as a really serious problem. So I'm not really going to be able to completely address this issue. It's really a social issue. It's an issue of immense importance, but one of the reasons that many rabbis give to the reasons why we should outlaw any kiddush with any alcohol is that it just is the wrong message to give to our children, and it should be outlawed. Again, like I mentioned before, the response is better to have them in shul in somewhat of a supervised environment than finding other places to do it. I found an article that was written in 2017 from the CJN, interesting, that they quoted from a letter from the Toronto's Vada Rabbanim. So that was before I came here. That they wrote that Kiddush clubs should be a cause for concern throughout the entire Jewish community. So I guess there was some pushback against them at the time, and some people said it's a blatant disrespect of the synagogue, bad example for children, and it's a growing crisis of alcoholism in the community. The Vad said they should take place after prayers in a public area open to all. So we're going to get into this question in a moment, but part of the appeal of Kiddush clubs is that it's outside the view of the community. And people have somewhat of an inhibition when they're in a public space. So it's possible that that even if you don't outlaw all alcohol, but if you make sure that it's in a public space and it's somewhat supervised, then it could create more incentive for people to drink less and be less out of control. I have to thank Craig for sending me the only academic article that I know that has a study of Kiddush clubs. It was written in 2022. And in this article, Michal Shaul surveys, she has in the article KC, Kiddush Club, the phenomenon of Kiddush Club. Kiddush Club, fraternity, authority, class, and gender, challenges in the modern Orthodox synagogue. Very interesting article. She defines Kiddush Club as before Shabbos Musaf, but it's not necessarily the only time, but that's kind of the classic time. She says that they go out during Haftorah, which some jokesters refer to it as half Torah. I never heard that one before. But and they go out, and she says it's not always the case, but it's often only an invite only type of experience. It's only for men, and sometimes it has to do with certain social class, like people bring very fancy alcohols and they show their financial status by certain types of Kiddush clubs. Interesting point that she notes here, the phenomenon of Kiddush clubs should be examined as part of the male urban experience, club culture in general and wine clubs in particular. Clubbing is the most common international urban experience among young men, especially among the financially secure and especially on the weekends. The club is very local yet belongs to a global phenomenon. Its essence is escapism. It's interesting, when I'm sitting in the same room that the Kiddush club happens in, as I'm sitting in the seat that somebody was talking about, whatever he was, pontificating yesterday and this time. Yeah, around this time. I don't know if there was ever a deal that was struck between the parties, but a lot of things happened in Kiddush Club. I happen to come to the one that is after davening, so we'll get to that. I didn't drink anything, but she says that this is the essence is escapism. It's a interesting thing because part of the appeal, according to Shaul, is that there's davening going on. There's kind of like this imposing long ritual that I want to be part of, but I can't make it the whole time. So part of the appeal is that I'm escaping from that. So to say that, well, as we'll get to, maybe halachically it's better to do it after davening, it doesn't address the very purpose that many see in the Kiddush club. Not justifying it, I'm just explaining the phenomenon. It creates spending time together in the same room, drinking and eating together creates a social circle that confirms the group identity and individual social status. It's sort of a tug of war, she describes here, within the prayer service itself. In other words, it's a manifestation of this tension between sort of the social piece of what a synagogue could be and the ritual and spiritual aspect of it. Which one is it? Is it a place for gathering, for social connection, or is it primarily for avodas Hashem, for spiritual experience? And there's that tug of war because both seem to be present. And that's kind of where the issue lies. Every synagogue has among its congregants those who demand that all other congregants honor your shul and mandate museum-like silence in the prayer sanctuary, along other congregants who are more interested in the social encounter. That is sort of another issue which has to do with the decorum in a shul. And it also probably is an issue for shuls that have a large range of congregants, because you could have some more select, concentrated, homogeneous types of places, a kollel or maybe a more yeshiva for sure, where people aren't there to socialize. They're there because either they learn in the yeshiva or they are there because they've chosen the most stringent of the, or the most, whatever you want to call it, the most religious of the options in front of them. So you have an easier time with that. Or on the other side of the spectrum, if you have people who their entire purposes of going to shul is really the social connection. I'm not saying Chabad is all the same, but many Chabads, they capitalize on this and they understand. We're doing outreach, we're doing Kiruv. We'll start at 10:30. We'll give them Kiddush. We'll have something from the Rebbe, and we'll put that in there. But we get that the context here is a social context in which we're trying to rope people in. The tensions become when you have somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. So that's what I think many shuls struggle with, which is where do you emphasize, where do you place your target on which audience you're trying to address. I just think it's a great line from Professor Jonathan Sarna. He writes, once upon a time, some people went to synagogue to talk to God. Nowadays, more and more people come to see their friends. The prayers and service are a distraction. I thought he was going to say talk to their friends. And he says conviviality goes better with a drink. So that's really kind of the tension. What is a shul's purpose? What is its goal? And that's going to be a very big factor in terms of what people see as the Kiddush club's role, if at all. I remember my father-in-law told a story a few years ago, but this was going back. When he was the rabbi in the Gulf Manor Synagogue, so I remember he, I believe, did away with Kiddush club, and he made a big speech about it once. He said, "We're all saying Yisker for the fallen soldiers." Maybe it was. I'm trying to remember the details. Maybe fudging the details, but the soldiers came up, and he says, "Well, we're saying, a tefillah for the soldiers. I guess because it was maybe it was a tefillah for the soldiers close to Haftorah, right? And they're boozing it out in the back. So then after the where's your respect? So my father-in-law told me that after davening, one of the guys came in from the Kiddush club. He said, "I heard that you were saying that we aren't respectful of the soldiers." He's like, "I fought in the IDF. So I can do whatever I want." It's like, okay, what is that? Like, what can you say? Yeah. So, okay, I'll just give she quotes a few rationales, justification for Kiddush Club, and not to give anyone additional ideas that they maybe not have thought of on their own. But as I mentioned before, I think that's the purpose of critical thinking, to analyze both sides of the issue. If you don't know both sides of the issue, you can't really form an opinion. So I'm not trying to encourage anyone in one direction or the other, but I think it's important to recognize the different arguments. So we heard a number of arguments against. We could go over them for a moment. These are social issues. We haven't yet gotten to the halacha. We have an argument against, which it's encouraging alcoholism. It's also not a proper role modeling for our children. It places the shul as more of a social interaction than a religious one. It also creates classes and separations between groups. It creates potentially a male-centered type of environment, which you could say that's helpful for the men. But again, it's creating these classes and these distinctions and these categories. What are some arguments in favor of having a Kiddush club? So she says that this is also Sha'ul. A careful analysis of Kiddush Club polemics indicate that the responses of its members are defensive and reflect an effort to justify their actions. I think that's pretty much everybody tries to justify your actions, right? Proponents of Kiddush Club insist that it is harmless activity that breaks up the service with a bit of a l'chaim and some camaraderie. They leave the synagogue during Haftorah or half Torah. Maybe it's like halftime. And the rabbi's sermon, which some claim is no longer relevant. So that applies to some who may leave during the rabbi's drasha to get to their Kiddush Club after davening. I've never heard of such a thing, but maybe in some theoretical situation. As for the alcohol proponents, as for the alcohol, so how do they justify? Okay, you could get a break, can have a nice drink of seltzer or pop, as they say in this country. So why do you have to have the alcohol? So they say no, it's only done by mature, responsible adults, and they go right back into the service, And they point out, this is the point that I was going to make a moment ago before this year, they point out they're doing a mitzvah. What is the mitzvah of Kiddush Club? They raise lots of money for the charities and the synagogues. So every shul is dealing with the same things, which is fascinating. She surveyed tons of different places, different communities. They all have the same arguments. We're raising money for the shul.
Is that the case today? The Kiddush clubs raise money for the shul?
They raise money for the shul, yeah, because they charge they charge people to be able to come. So they're raising money, so they're doing a mitzvah. Ultimately, the Kiddush Club members fulfill their religious and social duties. Sometimes they leave their familial responsibilities behind when they leave the younger children. But if they take the younger children, well, then that's a bad example. So they end up the husbands don't bring the kids to shul. Some Kiddush members say that paradoxically the Kiddush Club lessens the phenomenon of chatting during davening. I heard this one before also. Right? After all, it's easier to strain oneself and avoid small talk when you know that you will have an opportunity for a social encounter. The social capital vested in the Kiddush Club does not include, I don't know anyone who says, I really want to say hello to that guy, but I'm going to in 30 minutes, so now I'm not going to. I never heard of such a thing. No, but this is an argument that is made.
There are times where you want to say a funny, like a good story to your friend. You say, you don't want to hold it off.
Like a long-term, like a longer conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have one person who feels that is a good that is helpful for them, and then just generally speaking, as we mentioned this before, it's a social system. It creates camaraderie. Many of them it strengthens and refuels their relationships and their friendships, and it is a way in which brought congregants back after the years of the coronavirus. It also, apparently they've argued, this is interesting, the Kiddush Club raises the awareness of alcoholism, previously swept under the rug. I'm not sure about that one, but again, it's an interesting approach. What I would say is that when people are drinking in a public space, I think the best argument, one argument that I've heard which makes a little bit of sense, which is what we saw before, which is it's a supervised open area, which could be more a safer space, and people have more inhibition to it. I'll just note one last article before we start the halacha aspect of the shir. I saw in the Sefarim blog, which she quotes from Shaul, in 2008. It didn't have the author of the article. Maybe they were afraid to put their name to it. I don't know. But it was... It wrote here that most people misunderstand the Kiddush Club and they call it a modern phenomenon. But apparently they say that no, there's nothing new under the sun. And historically, goes back. At least we have records of tshuvos written, responsa written to the 16th century. The custom of the Bachram on Shabbos to leave from the synagogue after the Torah was removed from the ark and drink whiskey. Well, it goes back to that. And according to the responsum, groups would leave to drink during the prayers. From this responsum, we can glean a few important points, such as that the gatherings probably would not be called Kiddush Club because they didn't make Kiddush. They just did a shtickle, they just drank something. And then he says, it also is that he doesn't condemn this practice, but he expresses no outrage either. Interesting.
I think if
Rav Yosef Moshe Yitzchak Mezia. I don't know who, Yefei Nof. Yes, Lawrence.
If it's not a Kiddush Club, then you literally will go there for a l'chaim. But it's when you have said Kiddush and you have...
You're saying a club implies it's longer and more formal.
Kiddush implies that it's more than just a quick l'chaim.
Yeah.
You're going to have your mezanot, you're going to have a bit of herring, you're going to have some...
Right, in Kiddush el b'makom suda, we'll get to that. You have to have a certain amount of mazonos there.
And so if you're going just for a l'chaim, then it'll be a l'chaim and you'll go back.
Right. Yeah, so we could say that Kiddush Club implies it's more of a investment of time. Okay, so those are some of the issues I touched on. I'm not solving the issue. As I mentioned, you see that some shuls have an easier time managing this than others. Larger shuls, like our shuls, has many, many different constituencies, so it's difficult to figure out what the right approach would be. I know of certain shuls where they actually have a pause before most of every single Shabbos for everybody, which could address a point that I didn't see in this article at this point. Maybe it was earlier, but besides for the social piece, but speaking for myself, I don't know if they have. I don't know, but they have Kiddush. They have. It could be they have. I don't know, but I personally have a hard time not eating for a long period of time. Sometimes I will go to the Hashkama Minyan because I give a Parsha Shir, so I go to Shachris and the Hashkama Minyan, give me a Parsha Shir, then I go to the main shul because there's a bar mitzvah, I get to the Kiddush at 12 o'clock, I'm talking to everybody, I didn't get anything to eat, so sometimes I have a Shabbos where I have not eaten for 7 hours since I got up at, 6:45, maybe 6 hours. It's tough. So there are some shuls that have instituted, let's say, sanctioned an actual community Kiddush before Musaf, which we'll get to as well. So let's discuss, I guess that was a lot longer than I thought it would be, but it's interesting. I think it's just interesting to think about these issues and also just to reflect on the fact that every shul is dealing with similar issues, which I guess is somewhat of an achama. So let's focus on the halachic issues here. We have one issue, which is, again, we're defining Kiddush Club as before Musaf, but could you do Kiddush before Kriyas HaTorah, potentially? That's one question. The other issue is drinking or eating before Musaf, which we'll discuss. Then I would like to discuss a little bit about when the Chiyuv of Kiddush kicks in, because you have an obligation to do Kiddush before you eat, so you can't necessarily eat without doing the Kiddush, but maybe if you have more than you're supposed to eat before Musaf, then that's an issue. And then we'll discuss a little bit about what you need to make Kiddush on, assuming you're making Kiddush, whether it's before or after. Do you need wine? Can you use whiskey? And that discussion. So source number 4, the Gemara in Brachos, Daf Chav Ches, Amid Beis, quotes Rav Huna. Rav Huna says, Asr lo la'adam she'itam klum kodem she'ispal tfilas hamusafin. It is forbidden to taste anything. Important that his language is to taste anything. It's forbidden to taste anything before Musaf. But the Gemara continues and says, V'leis hilchasa look Rav Huna, and it's not also like Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, which is a different point. The halacha does not follow Rav Huna. So the question that is asked by the Mefarshim, what does it mean that halacha doesn't follow him? Does it mean the halacha doesn't follow him and then you can eat a little bit? Because he says, Asr l't'om. So he says, you can do it te'ima. That's what that means in the Gemara. Or does it mean the halacha doesn't follow him and you can even eat a full suda? And the l't'om was just his way of saying eat. So that's a machlokes in the Mefarshim. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Tefillah Birchas Kohanim, source number 5. The Rambam writes, "Asr lo la'adam she'itam klum o sheyas malacha me'achar sheyala mun hashachar ad sheyispal tfilas shachris." You have to make sure you daven shachris, and this is true in general. You're not supposed to do it because it's lo sucha al adam. You're not supposed to eat anything before davening. But he specifically says shachris. V'chein lo yashkim lepesach havero. You shouldn't go to somebody's house to give them shalom, kodem tfilas, shispal tfilas shachris, to say hello to somebody, to go out of your way. To say hello with someone you find in shul, that's okay, but to go out of your way is a problem. But I'll just finish in the last part of the Mishnah. He said of the halacha, the Rambam Mishnah Torah, avol toim ve'otzim halacha kodem shispal musaf v'kodem mincha. But one is allowed to eat before musaf. And do work if you need it. If it's not talking about Shabbos, but whatever. This is a footnote here. I think it's from Rav Tuger's translation. He says because we follow the opinion of the Chachamim against Rav Huna, right? We don't follow his opinion, and therefore you can eat before Musaf, or taste, we should say, before Musaf. However, there's another Gemara, the Gemara in Tainus. The Gemara in Tainus is an interesting discussion about when you have Birkas Kohanim, it's called Nesias Kapayim. And there's a whole discussion here, I'm not going to get into it for now, but there's a discussion about Yom Kippur and when you do it by Ne'ilah and Mincha and all these different things. The minhag of Chutz La'aretz is very strange. The Ramah tries to justify it. I think Josh Gutenberg gave a shir on this, but very, very strange halacha in Chutz La'aretz, so we only do it on the Mu'adim, and it's a strange minhag. But we're not going to get into that whole discussion. But within the Gemara in Tainus, it mentions there is a time in which we don't do Nesias Kapayim, and that's because of a concern, even if it's one opinion here, it's only one opinion, but we see there's a concern for Shichrus. Rabbi Meir says, Shachris, Rabbi Meir says, Shachris u'musaf mincha ne'ilah kula nish ben Nesias Kapayim. For Rabbi Yehuda says, Shachris and Musaf there is, Mincha Ne'ilah Ein Ben Nesias Kapayim. So the Gemara says, what's the difference? What's the machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Yehuda? Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, he says, since most people drink, it's seemingly the assumption is at their meal, but only after they daven Shachris and Musaf. So for Mincha, by that point, they may be more under the influence, and therefore they don't do Nesias Kapayim. So Rabbeinu Chananel points out from this Gemara, and the Torah quotes that in Reish Pei Vav in source number 8. He says, we see from this, he says the issue is Mincha. You can't have Nesias Kapayim by Mincha, because then you already ate lunch. But Shachris and Musaf is fine, because there's no problem of being drunk or eating anything that would cause you to drink. So the assumption of the Gemara is nobody's drinking or eating kodem tfilas musaf. That's what the Torah cites from the Rabbeinu Chananel. And the question is he describing a phenomenon that is just like the norm, or is he describing an isser? Is it forbidden to eat? The language of Rabbeinu Chananel is ein adam rashai. You're not allowed. No, do we paskin like that? So the Shulchan Aruch and Reish Pei Vav Sif Gimel writes, Mutter lit'om kodem tfilas hamusafin. It is permitted to taste something before tfilas musaf. Tahainu. What is that? Achilos peiros. Eating fruit. O afilu pas muat, or a little bread. Afilu te'ima shishpa kedei lis'od halev. Even enough just to the extent to satiate one's heart. However, aval su'uda asura. You're not allowed to have a full-blown su'uda. Says the Mishnah Brura, okay, so we're touching on this issue. It's a whole discussion of when does your Chiyuv Kiddush kick in, but the Mishnah Brura assumes that the Chiyuv of making Kiddush begins after you said Shachris. So you've already obligated in Kiddush. So once again, the Mishnah Berurah started asking the question, you just said, according to Rav Huna, we don't pass like Rav Huna. You're allowed to eat something. But you just told me it has to be before, it could be before Musaf, but then you can't have a Suda. 1 second. Ein Kiddush el b'makom Suda. You need to have a Suda when you have Kiddush. But then you just told me you can't have a Suda. But you just told me you have to have Kiddush because your Chiyuv Kiddush kicked in. So what's the solution? Yesh Lomar. Didai kishiyishte kos yayin achar kiddush, the gamzeo mikre suuda. The Mishnah Berurah says if you have enough of a cup of wine that you'd have to make an ala gefen presumably, that's enough to be yotze your chiyuv of kiddush. That's called a suda. It's not a full blown suuda, but it's enough. Or he says you could have peiros, etc. How much pas could you have? He writes in Sif Kat and Ches, Kebeitza, Tekolzeu B'chlal Chilas Arai. It's considered like a little bit, it's not a full Kviya Suda. V'kol sheken imochel mine targima mechameshes haminim deshari. So he's quoting the, it seems to be what a lot of people do for their Kiddush. We're not getting into when that should be 100% yet, but let's just assume, well, we are actually. So what are we saying? We're saying you're allowed to have a taste before Musaf. However, you have to make Kiddush. Your obligation of Kiddush kicked in because you heard Shachris. You daven Shachris. But you can't have a full-blown Suda. So you have Kiddush. Either you have a full cup of wine, or you have a little cracker or something like that, but a full-blown Suda you can't have. I'm not going to get into this right now, but it seems some of the posts can point out that Kriyas HaTorah and Shachris are connected, and therefore you shouldn't have the Su'uda after Shachris, but before Kriyas HaTorah.
Before Shachris, it should be fine.
Before Shachris, you're not allowed to have a full-blown Su'uda because of an issue of lo suchla al hadam. You're not allowed to eat, and in general, before you daven. Are you saying, what about a taste? So that comes up if a person, the poskim say, tea or coffee, right? So that's okay. Generally, I mean, there is discussion about it, but I think most poskim say having a tea or a coffee that you usually have during the week, that you have, every day is not considered an extra treat to yourself. But take a look at this Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa. in source number 11. This is Chelik Beis. He says, a person should not eat. You can't eat before Kiddush. And when does your obligation start? After Shachris. But then he says, let's say you're very weak. So you're very, very weak and you need to eat before Kiddush. Baked items, baboker, kodem shispal, yikadosh lefei sheyochal. You should make Kiddush before he eats. Betov im yomar tchila lefachot as brachos birchas Torah as parshas harishona shel Kriyas Shema. Okay. Well, let's say he doesn't need to eat of mizonos. Eino tzarich lechol divrei ma'afeh. Kim peiros lo yikadosh. He just needs to eat a little bit of fruit. He could just eat that, but it's better. He says birchas haTorah. Let's say a person can't wait till after davening; it's just too long, and they're weak. Their nature is weak. They need to eat. Let's say they have low blood sugar. Let's say they're hypoglycemic, something like that. Look at this: mutav shispal shachris biyachidus. Better they should daven shachris alone. Yikadosh kiddush, make kiddush, and then eat, and then go to the Beis HaKnesses to hear kaddish, baruchu, kedusha, kriyas Torah. Wow. Okay. Then he addresses the question that we're discussing here, which is, can you eat before Musaf? So he quotes the same halacha, that you can eat a little bit, not a full suda, before Musaf. And he says, even on Rosh Hashanah, before Tkiyas Shofar, you can do it before Tequila, you have to do it before Tkiyas Shofar, but you have to make Kiddush. Now, what's the issue one would have, and why is he saying it's only for someone who's weak? So in the footnote in the Shmir Shabbos, he writes that the Isser hu Shema Yishkach lehispal Musaf. Why shouldn't you have a full Suda? Why shouldn't you? What's the problem? You're making Kiddush because you're going to forget to daven Musaf. And that in that way it would be enough to appoint a shomer, someone who's going to remind you, to daven Musaf. So, at some point is out a Chasim Sofer who also says this. The Chasim Sofer says, Minag Avosenu, our forefathers had a practice that they were machmir on themselves to not do it. But he says, Meker Adin, you're allowed to eat, as long as it's not a Suda, you're allowed to eat before. He got a shaila about like a bris. And they wanted to have a bris before they daven Musaf. And he says, basically, Meker Adin, it's okay to do that before Musaf. The Tzitz Eliezer has an interesting explanation in source number 13, Chilek Vav Siman Zayin. Tzitz Eliezer says that according to some poskim, your obligation of Kiddush only kicks in after Musaf. So maybe even without Kiddush, if you didn't daven Musaf yet, you could have a little bit to eat. But we assume usually that it has after one makes after one davens Shachris. I mentioned this before about davening, having Kiddush before Musaf on Rosh Hashanah or Simchas Torah. So some defend this minhag. The Tzitz Eliezer defends it, as was just mentioned. But the Mata Ephraim in Tov Kuf Peches, he does not like it so much. He says, Osr lechel kodem tkiyas shofar. You should not eat before tkiyas shofar. A person who feels very weak is not going to make it until he eats something. Yase kiddush v'yochel kazai is leka. Leka is honey cake, right? They should eat a little. Make kiddush, eat a little bit. B'chtei shiyeh b'makom seuda, right? You have to have a little bit of mizonos. V'achar kach yishtema'at kafe oteh. After have a little coffee, tea. However, mikol makom yasu b'tzina b'pnei ha'amon shelo yakilu b'yoser. Do it in a private place so people don't see you. So he's very against having this drink, before Tkiyah Shofar. But it seems that there are many shuls or yeshivas that have this practice of doing it. But look at what he writes, though. He says in the footnotes in Ha'ara Beis, he says, you know what? It's not the best thing, but it's certainly better than them becoming intoxicated. So therefore, don't go out against the coffee drinkers, because they could end up going for the harder stuff. And the people who drink coffee, they have what to rely upon. Minchas Yitzchak points out that the issue was you're going to forget to daven Musaf. So he says that if you have a lot of people, a big congregation, does it all together, it's not possible they're all going to forget to daven Musaf. The issue is Choshin Lapshia. V'haya Efshar Degam, this is Minchas Yitzchak Chelech Hey Simin Kuf Yud Aleph. Efshar Degam Su'uda Mutter Midina El Mishum More Shal Yom Hadin Haminik Shal L'Ta'om Klal. He says, before on Rosh Hashanah he's talking about, he says, if everyone does it together, we're not worried you're going to forget to daven Musaf. And he says, the fact that you don't see people doing it, he says, well, that's probably because of the fact that it's such a serious day, maybe they didn't want to eat anything. But Mi'ikar Adin, it's definitely mutter. So, I think it's getting a little bit late, but I think I saw this article written by Rabbi Daniel Mann. I don't think there's any relation maybe to Rabbi Yehuda Mann, I don't know. But he was asked a specific shaila about simcha. They were making a kiddush, and they wanted to know, can they make the kiddush before davening musaf? And they actually asked him if they could do it before Kriyas HaTorah. So he points out that as a practical guidance that he would give, that in his article he writes that early Kiddush is proper only for a significant need, like you see in the poskim. If a person's weak, if it's for Rosh Hashanah, where there's another issue which I forgot to mention, which is that if let's say you have a long davening, and you don't have a Kiddush before Musaf, you could end up going through Chatzos fasting, which is a whole discussion. Are you allowed to fast on Rosh Hashanah? Are you supposed to fast? Or you're not supposed to fast? So somewhere Makbid, Rav Shechter, when he was here for Shabbos, he was Makbid to try to make Kiddush before Chatzos on Shabbos, which we barely made it for him, because he wouldn't eat Kiddush until he was like at his real. He wouldn't make Kiddush until he was at his real Suda. And we had this a nice Suda with him. But it was like he gave a shear, he did all the, and he's like, he's in his late 80s, and he didn't eat anything already since, he woke up for sure, probably before 8 or 8:30 or something. He didn't eat till like 1:15. But he didn't want to miss that point. So one of the reasons to make a Kiddush on a long davening day before Musaf, like a Simchas Torah or a Rosh Hashanah, is not just because Lesher's hungry. I do get hungry, but it's because you don't want to fast past Chatzos on a Yontif or on a Shabbos. So Rabbi Mann in this article, he says, well, your family Simcha, he says it's a one-off, so he wasn't so against it because it's not starting a practice, but he was saying that it's only generally done in a case of significant need. But one could make the argument, based on the Minchas Yitzchak, and this is what I mentioned before, if everybody does it together on Shabbos, then it's much less of a problem. You could even have a larger, significant Suda, because the issue is you're going to forget to daven Musaf. But if you have a formal timeline and a schedule and everything like that, and everyone's doing it together, it would be potentially less problematic. We're not even getting into the fact that you're missing Haftorah, which you're supposed to hear, assuming that you're going to Kiddush Club during Haftorah. I don't know exactly, okay, it's a chiyuv of the tzibor, each person, but you're missing that. And generally speaking, most people, I can't say for most, but I noticed that in this phenomenon that oftentimes people don't make it back to shul for Musaf, so it could be they're davening where they are. It's just a little bit, it's a little bit hefker. You can definitely understand the concern if there's going to people be leaving the main sanctuary that is davening, and they're doing this other thing. They could definitely miss Musaf. To Do we have time to go through making Kiddush on whiskey, or feels pressure to get out here? I guess I'll do it quickly.
Yeah.
Okay, 4 or 5 minutes on this question. Can one make Kiddush on whiskey? So there's definitely like an old standing practice for people to make Kiddush on whiskey. But it seems to be, if you want to go based on the strict halacha, it seems to be somewhat problematic. I'll just go through some of the sources very briefly. There's basically a few issues here. One is the question of Chamar Medina. And then the issue would be also the amount. How much you yotze with your mitzvah of Kiddush. So the Shulchan Aruch writes that you're allowed to make Chamar Medina, you're allowed to make Kiddush on what he calls it Sheichar, which the Mishnah Berurah says it's a Chamar Medina. B'malkum she'ein yayin matzoi. When there's no wine that's available, you can make Kiddush on Sheichar. That's in Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, Reish Ayin Beis. Sif Tes. So, definitely if there's no wine, you can make Kiddush on what the Mishnah Berurah refers to as Chamar Medina. What's the definition of Chamar Medina? It's a debate, but basically in the poskim it has two factors. Number one, it's a respectful beverage you could serve to a guest, and number two, according to the Shulchan Aruch Harav, when you're making sorry, 1 second. The definition, it's two criteria here. First, that the drink must be one that people use as a primary beverage in that place, and the beverage must not be cheap or trivial. You'll be respectfully giving it to some sort of guest, or it can't be like a low grade thing. So, what about? First of all, it seems to be. I'm not going into the details here, but it seems to be from the poskim that this is only by Kiddush during the daytime. You can't do this by nighttime. If you don't have wine, the halacha would be at nighttime you do it on the challah. We're not getting into the reason of that for now. But basically, it's only a question for the Kiddush by day. So it seems to be that wine is preferable. Now, what are the people who drink yain saruf or sraf? That's what the Mishnah Berurah says. It's actually a practice that many people do. It's in Mishnah Berurah, that same siman in Sif Katan Lamed. He says, let's say a person likes yain saruf. Yimchaviv lo yain saruf yachul l'kadesh alav b'yom l'chachila b'bindan asenu shu chamar medina. One could drink hard stuff l'chachila because it's considered chamar medina. Even it seems to be even if there is wine available, because that's what I like. I like to do that. Okay, so that's a long-standing practice. Even though others say it's better to have wine because in those days. Maybe wine was not available. Yeah, like whiskey or schnapps. Yeah. So some say that's only because wine was very expensive. Now, it is true. If you talk about every week for everybody, and you're talking about wine, not grape juice, which we're not getting into that right now, it is more expensive than using a little bit of schnapps for each one. So that could be still relevant, but many people point out that nowadays wine is more prevalent, it's not as expensive, and therefore wine should be used. But there is a long-standing minute to use yain sraf. What about the fact is the amount? The Mishnah Berurah says yizar likach kos machzik revius ulishos minimal lugmav shu rov revius. Really, you should drink the majority of a revius. How much is a revius? Okay, it's debated by the poskim, but it's only a b'diavad b'shasachak. That you don't have to drink a malilugma, which is a majority of the revius. So many shot glasses are about 1 ounce, maybe 1.2 ounces. It's not enough according to the Mishnah Berurah. Now there is the har tzvi, the tzvi pesach frank, based on a taz. The taz does say you can use yain saruf, hard stuff, and the taz doesn't mention this, but. The har tzvi in Siman Kuf Nun Tes extends this taz, without getting into all the details, to even the shear. Not only just that you're allowed to use it, but he extends this even to the amounts. In other words, he writes like this: B'din yain sraf l'kiddush svaras taz hu b'simin reish yud ta'aminu V'savata zo shtia hashir hu b'chol mashu sava. He says, what is that concept of having to make a bracha achrona? And it's in Siman Reish Yud and Sif Katan Aleph. He says it's a concept of being satiated. So if the item in which you're drinking satiates you, you'd have to make an al michya or after bracha. So he says that we could extend even to drinking a lower amount of a shear because it satiates you, and that's what the Har Tzvi suggests. Again, it's not necessarily the opinion of most. And a very interesting chiddush that Rav Shechter quotes in Be'ikvei Atzon from the Kotcheklav Golem, the Eretz Tzvi. He says that the definition of a beverage is something that quenches your thirst. A definition of a beverage. So he argues that the requirement of revius, let's say, 3.5 ounces or 4 ounces, whatever, Rabbi Willig holds it's only 2.5, but it's more than most shot glasses. He says that only applies to beverages. And liquor doesn't have the status of a beverage. And therefore, you would be able to be yotze even with just a kazayas, an olive size, which is even less. So that is an interesting chiddush. But even if you accept that chiddush, it's quoted in the name of Rav Chaim Volozhin, you have a different problem. Then it's not Chamar Medina anymore. Because the requirement of Chamar Medina, as we mentioned, if you're not using wine for Kiddush, was that it's a beverage. But you just told me it's a Meichel. So you can't what is it? Have your cake and eat it too. You can't play both sides of the issue. I only need a kazayis because it's a food. But if it's a food, it's not a beverage. If it's not a beverage, you can't make Kiddush on it. So that's why, if you've noticed, sometimes I come by the Kiddush, the Kiddush when it happens after davening, which is more ideal, although it's also good to hear the drasha. But we talked about that.
A serious question: if someone
Tafas meruba tafas.
If someone doesn't want to wait till the davening is completely finished and they have a choice to miss Haftorah or the rabbi's speech, which one's better to miss? Get them serious.
I want to have a job tomorrow, but
no, serious question.
I think that the drasha being after davening has it's better halachically, but it also creates other problems, right? Yeah. Meaning, if you would have your kiddush after davening and the rabbi spoke before Musaf, you would hear him.
But let's say the rabbi spoke for 5 minutes instead of 15 minutes. Say better.
The drasha is a relatively modern invention. The drasha is.
But wasn't it invented for times before? Like the reality.
A sermon. It's a
when
sermon.
It first started.
Yeah.
People, that was their Torah for the week, right? There wasn't online. There wasn't multiple shirim going on. Like the reality is, like. There's a lot of shuls that stop the rabbi's speech, because, especially more yeshivas.
Yeshivas don't have a drasha because they never had that in Europe or whatever.
What is the point for the average person these days of the rabbi's speech? Forget the.
This gets to a not halachic discussion. I think it's not a halachic. It's a disrespectful thing. Yeah.
And I understand it's disrespectful, but the reality is, after sitting in shul for 2 hours and I didn't go up for the thing to sit in shul for another 20 minutes, I don't have the patience to do it. So
I think there's multiple factors here. There's multiple factors. One is your own personal, let's say if you're not in there for the drasha, you don't feel as connected to what's happening in the shul. I think that's from the rabbi's perspective. He likes, there's a lot to say. I feel like it's getting late and I feel like it would be maybe an important topic to discuss. But let me just bottom line the other question. It seems to be better to make Kiddush on wine or grape juice. We haven't really discussed the grape juice thing, but and if you're going to have schnapps, it's better to have a majority of a revius, which is a lot for most. Let's say you're going with the smallest amount of shira. By Willig holds 2.5 ounces, but it's still more than most of the cups that are out there. So you have to find the right cup. So a Kiddush club should try to find the right cups. And in regards to doing before Musaf, we said it was only really if there's a major need. In terms of the Rabbi Trasha, there's multiple factors, but I think it's less about the halacha. I guess halacha does, Kavod Torah is important also, but I guess we could talk about that maybe at a different point. Okay, that's what we have for today. Everyone have a wonderful day.